Hey, and welcome back to another Twinmotion video. In this video, we're going to look at how to make videos and animations in Twinmotion. There's quite a lot to it, but in the end, it is pretty simple. If you've used other programs such as Inkscape, things like that, it's very simple. You're creating scenes based on where cameras are, and you're pretty good to go. But before we get into it, if you happen to learn something, please demolish that like button. It tells me that you did learn something and that you might have enjoyed the video. Also consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell. Really helps me out a lot. All right, let's jump into it. We're in Twinmotion and we're going to make a video. I've got this model. It was a previous competition, and at this point, I want to make an animation. So what am I going to do? Well, I've got all my information, all my models in my scene graph here, and we've got over here at the left, media. We'll click on media, and instead of going to image, panorama, whatever, we'll go to video. And it's very simple. Create a video. As soon as we do that, if you are familiar with creating images and editing images and getting all the effects and everything, camera effects, everything that you would want in an image, the exact same applies to video, except there's a few more things you need to worry about because it's a video. So the fact that it's a video means we have essentially multiple images or scenes or whatever you want to call them. For the sake of this video, I'm going to call these scenes. You're going to see them like part one or whatever it is. So like part and scene, whatever I might call it, it's the same. That's what I'm talking about. And so really all a video is, of course, is a series of these parts, a series of these scenes put together to create a nice animation. And all we really need to do is take the same idea of editing the settings for an image and apply that to editing these particular scenes. And after that, it's a matter of rendering it out and you're good to go. Now, there are a few things I want you to know at the end I want to cover that are going to really make or break what your video is going to ultimately look like. And I'll make sure to stick around to the end of the video to see that. So here we are. I've just created a new video, and by default, you're going to get part one, and that's what it is. And we have this here. It says move in the viewport and click here. Okay, well, if you're familiar with images, we have this particular part, and this part is taking all the information that I have over here visibility wise of my scene graph, and from there it's applying it to this part. I mean, that's very simple. Okay, so maybe we say, well, maybe we don't want to see the vegetation, so we can turn the vegetation off, and you'll notice it doesn't actually update here until I press the update. And you can see in the background, my vegetation is gone. Now, I do want the vegetation, so let's go ahead and put that back. I will show it again and then update it. So it's actually called recapturing, so we can recapture. And all that's doing is recapturing all the information, visibility I have, and placing it in my part. Okay, very simple. What else do we see? What are we looking at? What's our interface like for videos? Again, we've got part one, we've got the three dots, and every time we see the three dots or dots in Twinmotion, you've got more settings, more things you can work with. So let's click on that, and what do we have to work with here? Well, we've got single ambiance, we've got start end ambiance, collapse, rename, cut, copy, paste, everything else that we're used to seeing. So I'm actually going to cover the single ambiance, start and end ambiance, and collapse in a little bit. But everything we've seen here is really kind of all the same. So rename, again, if you don't want to call it part one, great. If you have a particular thing you're looking at, again, if you want to call this overall shot, it makes sense. So rename it if it makes sense to you. And I'd recommend doing that if you're making a long scene or if you have multiple people working on this eventually, you want to let them know what's going on. And then to the right of that, we've got a time. This is actually a time. If you hover over here, it says part length, and this is literally the length of the part. And by default, each part will be 10 seconds. And you can see that the left side in minutes, the right side in seconds. And, that's great. What I can do at this point is decide, well, if I want this to be 5 seconds, I just change that to 5. Change it to 5 right there, not a big deal. Now, this doesn't really matter. Nothing's really changing about the video because at this point, I've got one part. At this point, it is just a still image. Nothing is going on because I have only one part. I have to add a second part to do anything else. So I can come up here and I see a plus, and this plus is telling me that I can create a new part. Okay, let's go ahead and make a new part. This is perfect. So now I can see not only do I have a new part, but it's also 10 seconds. And if I look at the left here, obviously the 5 plus the 10 is my 15 seconds. That's perfect. And I can't actually edit the overall length of the video because that's based on the summation of all of the parts. Of course, that clearly makes sense. So that's easy enough to worry about. So again, we're now in scene 2, and maybe we want to like move inside at this point. So I can come all the way in here. At this point, maybe we want to float somewhere here inside. And again, it's based on what I want to see. You know, I'm okay with it here, and I can hit refresh, recapture, and now I can see that I'm inside. And maybe at this point, I want to play or preview. Well, I can just simply hit the play button, and it's actually going to play from the point in which I'm in. I'm actually in part 2, so it's going to play part 2. Well, there's only one particular piece of part 2, so nothing's going to update. So I need to come over here to part 1. And as you can see, I can actually scrub. If you're familiar with that term in video editing, I can scrub as in like move across time and not just start at the beginning and press play. But what I can do is take this all the way back to the beginning, and I can press play. Okay, great. Really, nothing's happening yet. Let's see what happens after this. Well, I'm going to jump to that point. Well, I don't necessarily want to do that. You might want to do that, in which you can leave it all the same, but we don't really want to do that. We want to like actually animate a video. We want to move from this start point in part 1 to this next point in part 2. So how do we do that? So in fact, what we need to do is work within one of these parts. So like I said in the beginning, we've got these parts, and you could call them scenes, whatever you want, but within these parts is like, it's one jump. So it has to do with the way parts work versus something else we're about to get into. So parts, what we've covered so far, is basically jumping from one piece to the next, one scene to the next. And you don't really have much more control over that. But that's where, so it's really not animating unless you happen to be in the same location, which it's still not really animating. But if we do want to animate, which of course we want to do this, what we're doing in this video, we actually need to work within one of the parts. And so we could call them pieces or something. So right now we have part 1 and 2, but there's only one piece to each of them. And I'm calling them pieces. That's not a technical term, but I think pieces will make a little more sense because pieces are within one part, whatever. So let's go ahead and work within part 2. And if you see here, I can always come up here and create another part, but I don't necessarily want to do that because then I'd just be jumping to another location. So let's go into part 2, and if you see here, I've got a plus on the right side of this single frame for part 2. And if I click on that, now things start to make a little more sense though. So picture a part left, this part 1 and part 2, of course, but then we've got part 2, which actually includes 2 pieces. So what's really doing the animating is everything within a part. So imagine you're creating a video and you've got this beautiful entrance, and it starts with this overall shot, and you come down into this lobby, something like we might have here. And at that point, maybe you decide you're going to fade out to a different location in the building. At that point, you've got that first part, which is the overall flying into the lobby. That's part 1. Then part 2 would be you fade out after you end part 1. Of course, then fade into part 2, which is another location in your model. And then at that point, you're animating to see something else. So that's what we're working with here. We've got part 2 and then all the pieces. So what I'm going to do now actually is I'm going to click on this first section here, and I want to go back to the overall shot. So we're basically going to reframe this shot as if we're looking at some sort of overall shot again. And at this point, we can determine, okay, that is like the first piece of this whole part. Okay, like, you know, this is fine. We're looking at this overall shot. Cool. And then again, I'm going to recapture. Great. So I'm going to recapture that. And then you can see here, I've got one piece is this overall. The next piece is the lobby, and it's 10 seconds long. So let's go ahead and press play from this point in part 2, and we can probably see an animation going from the overall shot to the lobby shot. So let's press play, and there we go. We're animating. Of course, the quality is kind of meh because this is all live TV. It's what it is. But you can see clearly the animation works. Very simple. Looks great. Not quality-wise necessarily, but nonetheless, the animating looks great. Okay, so that's good. We're happy with that. And we can continue on. And so the idea is that I'm working within this part 2, and I can continue to build this. I can, maybe I want to go look at the amphitheater over here, and I want to get to this point. Okay, well, I just add another part, and it's even cool. What's cool here is that it's going to take all my information that I currently have set up and my location and capture that in my next frame. And, maybe we want to move a little quicker here. And so the idea here is this whole clip, this whole part actually is 10 seconds. So if I press play again, I'm going to start moving much quicker. If I go to the front here at the beginning, I'm going to move much quicker because this whole thing is 10 seconds and I need to cover all 10 of those seconds within each one of these parts. And of course, I can reduce the length if I want this to be 5 seconds. That's simple enough. I can press play and I'm going to move twice as fast. This is going to cover everything in 5 seconds instead of 10. Okay, that makes sense. Of course, that's probably a little quicker, whatever. Very easy. Now at this point, we can come over here always to go to the first frame and then the last frame. And it's going to be the first frame and last frame within this particular part. That's easy enough. So if I want to go back to the beginning and look, great. Or I can always, again, scrub. Here's we can actually see the scrubbing in action. I can scrub between this entire animation and see what it would look like as far as I'm transitioning between one point and another, like the point in which I go through the mullion, whatever, to go through the window. Cool. Really easy. Now, okay, we've looked at the different parts. We understand what they are. We've looked at the pieces of the parts, not technical term, but I like it. We've looked at those pieces, what they do. Now let's look at the rest of the options that we have to look at within the parts. So I've got single ambiance, I've got start and end ambiance, and then I've got collapse. Well, let's first look at collapse. Let me just click it and let's see what happens. So when I click that, you could see that all of the pieces of my part 2 are now collapsed and all really kind of falling within one single part. That's at least what it's looked like. It looks like that. So what's actually happening here? Well, I have collapsed all of my pieces into one. So they're all there, but I can't see them. And the reason you might do this is that you've got new options, new things that you can work with once you have collapsed all of your pieces. So we've collapsed everything. And I actually have the option of moving this part somewhere else. I've got this bar here, and you can see that it does highlight. And once it does highlight, I can drag this, and you can see I'm just dragging. I can just drag it over to part 1, and I can actually start with this part 2 instead of part 1. No, I'm actually going to rename this so don't confuse you and I, and we'll call this start, whatever, it doesn't matter. But then we've got part 1. So we can see what happens at this point if I press play. I'm going to press play. We're going to go throughout this entire animation. It is 8 seconds in this start. And then I'm going to get to this next part. And like I said before, it's going to jump to this location. And because I have only one piece in here, only one little clip, it's not going to do anything but just run across that clip and spend extra time looking at it. It's like a still image. So that's how you would do still images in that case. So really, we're at 13 seconds. And you can see as I have the option, once I go back into these different clips, to update the information, the timing. I can add 10 seconds there, make that 10 seconds, boom, 18 seconds. Really easy to do. Okay, but there's also one more thing to work with down here. We can look at these scissors, and they're essentially transitions, like start and end transitions. So like I said, if we have part 1, or start in this case, we've got like one section of your video that goes through this animation. Then you got a second that goes through another portion, which would be this part 1. I'll go ahead and rename this to part 2, so that makes a little more sense. Part 2. And so these scissors allow me to make some sort of animations or effects, whatever, transition-wise, and smooth up some of these frames so we don't have this ridiculous jump from there to there. That's a little harsh. So let's go to the beginning here, and the option I have is to cut, which cut really is just what we just saw. It's like literally going from one frame where you are, cutting directly to the next frame. But I've also got fade to black and then fade to white. Now, I particularly like fade to black because you're generally starting with a darker screen or whatever. So let's fade to black and let's see what happens when I go to the very beginning here. You can see that's black. And then I press play and then everything fades in. Really nice, very simple. I could also fade to white, go back to the beginning. I'm going to start with a white and it's going to fade in. It's really up to you. I personally like the fade to black. That's cool. Now, of course, we've got the default cut there at the end, but I can change that to fade to black. And so let's go back to at this point here, and when we can see what happens at this transition, it fades from black into this new part, into part 2. Great, easy enough. Okay. And so through all of that, of course, we can create another part. We've got our first frame and our last frame within each part. We can, of course, play within that part, but finally, this button here is our collapse and expand. So just like before, we were able to collapse and expand those. I can collapse it, and then we have all of the pieces back within part 1 that we can work with and easily transition here, do everything that we need to within this particular part, and then go back in, do everything I need to for the other part, and then put them all together. Like, it's really simple. So I will say a lot of times you're probably going to create just one nice smooth animation. Now, maybe not. That's why you have multiple parts. But if that's the case, all you're doing is working within one single part, and that's pretty simple. It's pretty simple, really nice. Let's go ahead and add a few more frames here just so we can, further extend this out and, see what it looks like. That's fine. So let's go ahead and add this here. Got another location. Of course, you can see that it's black, and why is it black? Well, it's because we have that fade to black set up here at the very end. And so I'm going to actually expand, I'll collapse that again, and then change this to cut so it isn't black whenever we end up adding new clips. So let's come in here, I'll come back over here to the end. Sure, this looks good. And let's go ahead and create one more here. And then finally, we will come back here to get a different kind of overall shot. It's maybe somewhere over here. And this will work. Looks good. So there we go. We've got our final shots. Of course, this is still 8 seconds, so this is going to fly if we actually play this. So I do want to make this something more like 20 seconds. It probably would be longer if I were trying to actually look at pieces. But nonetheless, we still can scrub between this entire thing. And I don't necessarily like the way that it's transitioning or like moving from one camera place it to the next, but I unfortunately don't have a lot of control over that. If I wanted to change this so like I would actually stay in the building, then I would need to create more locations where I'm getting new camera locations, updating the camera locations, because it essentially is going from one camera location and smoothly to the next one directly. And there's no real way I can get around that. Now there's, if you're familiar with Inkscape, it's particularly nice for that because you can place a camera and then physically move the camera. Now, of course, what I can do is I can always come into this location. I can press this location and I can change the location. Maybe if I want to bring this down a bit, I can always update this and recapture this. So if I could also recapture it and move like further back and like transition smoother, easy enough. So once I get to this point, let's say I'm happy with this. It's not the best looking animation, not the best looking video, anything like that. But let's say we're happy with this. Not too bad. Not too bad at all. Now, all right, easy enough. But at this point, it looks pretty drab. Like there's no real effects. Maybe I want to change the time of day, do anything like that. Well, that's where ambiance starts to play. And I can't necessarily say why it's called ambiance in videos and then nowhere else in Twinmotion. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But ambiance is essentially all the effects and settings that you would put towards an image, but in this case, towards a video. Easy enough. So let's go here to the beginning. Of course, I am at black, but that's fine. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter where I am. It's all based on these particular pieces or clips within this whole part. And so, of course, if you're familiar with editing images, we have the 3 dots here. And you can see I've got copy and paste ambience, which I'm going to get to soon. But of course, I have the more. I can click on more, and then this is going to take me to all my different settings. So again, you'll notice this is interesting that whenever I do end up going to more settings within a particular piece or clip, it's going to default to the beginning of this whole part, or of this clip in this case. So because I've already gone to the trouble of setting the fade to black, I actually need to change that back to cut because I actually want to see what's going on. And so that's the type of thing, leave the transitions for last is what I'm trying to say here. So again, we're in this first clip, in the first piece of the start part. And I'm going to click more. And here I have all my options that I might have with the typical video. And I can change my location, of course, the time of day, anything like that. If I want to start this earlier in the morning, so we can kind of go throughout the day, something like that, change the month, all this, that's fine. Go back to settings, whether, again, all of this information is viewable in a previous video that I've done about images and all the settings. You can find that there, and I will link that up there at the top right now. It's very important that you understand all these different effects and things that you can apply to an image, or in this case, a video, because it's all the same. It translates all the same. Of course, I can do anything I want. This is really nice because if I come into the weather effects, you might have seen other videos that I've done or other videos on Twinmotion with wind speed and wind and all this and direction. That doesn't really come into play, at least from a formal or presentation aspect, until you are actually presenting your Twinmotion or creating an animation. And that's exactly where this is. So we can start to get lots of different wind and different settings like that if you want, because that's really what this program is great for. You have wind and you have so much control over it, and especially in an animation where you can see all of it. Of course, you can make any change that you want in this information. All the effects are for you to change and for you to do whatever you want. I'm not going to go crazy on these because I want to show you the idea of how each one of these clips can be updated individually, and so you can change all this information. One thing I did want to cover with the effects is actually something to do with the camera. So maybe, for example, I want to align the camera in a specific way to where it actually is precise to a specific location. Well, that is actually possible. So if I click on a particular clip here and I click more, of course, I get all the effects. But within the camera, you can see, yes, I have all of my normal looking effects here that I could work with as I would within an image. But I also have this little icon up here, and this is actually called Camera Align. And it looks like a straight line with a camera facing that straight line. That tells me that the camera, using this Camera Align tool anyway, can be aligned perpendicularly to a wall or a face, any face in your model. So that's really interesting. So maybe what I want to do is just kind of reframe this shot to show something outside. And while this looks good, maybe I want to be perpendicular to the face of this wall, something like that, for example. So we can click on this tool, and then now my mouse is going to change to something like that, and where I still actually have like a little point there. And so I can point to wherever I want and then just click that face. And you can see that the camera rotates to look, in a sense, perpendicularly to that particular face. It looks really great. And, it is a way of aligning. And you can do this to anything. If I were to click the ground, for example, I'm now going to be looking perpendicularly to the ground, as in like straight onto the ground. This is a really helpful tool to quickly align to something and get a really nice, precise looking camera view. And the nice thing is that this tool is actually usable within an image. Like, of course, we've said before many times, you have the same options as far as effects go within an image, as well as the camera align. If you're looking at the camera align, if I go to an image, for example, and click on this image, go to more, and then camera again, and then there's my camera line. And I can reframe this shot just like I could do with a video. It's all the same for images as well. Very cool stuff. That will work for this clip, and you can see that it's not like having to change the visibility of what I see in my scene. The ambiance actually updates automatically for that clip, and that's great. And so, of course, as I move here, that ambiance is going to, in fact, change. And you'll notice that it does, in fact, change as I move. So let's go to the start here, press play, and preview what this looks like. And, of course, this does look really terrible, as it's completely flashing and all that. But what it's actually doing is it's transitioning not only the location that my camera's at, but also the effects that I've applied to this particular clip compared to the next clip. And so as I get to this next clip, you can see that all of that information as far as ambiance goes is now it's fully static. We're at this point. And so it's essentially transitioning from this time of day to that time of day, for example. And it's doing the same thing with all the effects. And so that's great, except that, it can be a little weird, a little confusing. Of course, if I have just this one clip edited at a different time of day, that isn't exactly what I want. It may not be, but at the same time, you might want to change your time of day throughout the course of the entire clip. That might be the case. So what are some ways around this? Well, that is actually dealing with the copy and pasting of ambience. And so I can come over to this clip. I can click on this clip, And then I've got my keyframe menu with my settings, and I've got, of course, I can delete it. I don't want to do that, but I've got my copy ambiance and then paste ambiance. And so I'm actually going to copy the ambiance because it's going to take all the effects from that particular clip, this particular piece, and then if I paste it somewhere, it's going to paste those exact same settings somewhere else. So I'm going to get the same look, have the same consistency, so I can go to the trouble only once. I don't have to do this in every clip. That would be terrible. And of course, you're bound to mess something up. You wouldn't have the same settings, whatever it might be. So I can come over here, I can hover over this, and I can go and I can paste ambiance. And as soon as I do that, everything's going to update and look the exact same. And it's nice because, of course, as I now play this, it's probably still going to look a little weird, but the ambiance, the effects are there. Now you can see that as I start to get to the point where I'm beginning to transition into the next clip, that yes, I do get more of that flashing because those effects are updating and all of that information is updating. And I'm still transitioning that time of day, for example. So that's great. We've looked at all of that. Now, there's one more thing I can do here. I can come down here to settings, and this is going to be the settings for the entire part. Now, it's kind of confusing because you've got settings for the whole part, but then we have pieces that have their own settings. But so let's actually see what happens. I'm just going to change the time of day to something that is drastically different, maybe later in the day. We could do something like that. Okay, so that's good. I'll come over to video, back to my video here, and you can see, boom, just globally. So really, if you want to do like one static thing, you want to have one static look for the entire scene, and you're happy with something like this, then really all you need to do is go to settings down here within the part, and you could see all the settings that you have. You can change it all, whatever. And then at that point, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about copy and pasting to every single one. It wouldn't really be necessary. Now, the reason you might want to copy and paste and it is if you want to slightly change things, slightly change the effects, again, going from one piece to another, one clip to another. And of course, it will transition. You'll see the new pieces update, the effects update, and you'll be good to go that way. Whereas the settings for the part here is global for the entire part. That's just something to be aware of. It's going to override everything, actually. So really, the only way I can get back to something like that, of course, is if I undo or if I come back in here and start editing these clips individually. Now, I'll go ahead and put this somewhere in the middle of the day so we kind of know what we're looking at again. So one last thing we haven't looked at is if I'm looking at the settings of this particular part, I've got the single ambiance, and then I've got start end ambiance. So single ambiance is what we just looked at. We have a single ambiance for every single clip. Or in this case, because it's actually looking at the part, we have a single ambiance for the entire part. So we'll always have the option of changing the ambiance of a single clip or piece if we want to. Now, this is actually referring to the whole part. I have the single ambiance, which is what we just did. We overrode the whole thing. We changed the time of day, and it changed it in every little piece, every little clip. But I can also just click on Start End Ambiance, and it's basically a toggle. Now, it doesn't actually indicate much, but what it does show is you can see here at the bottom, instead of seeing settings, I see Start and End, which is interesting. And it kind of makes sense. If I come back to the menu and I change it back to single, now I just have settings. So again, single is global settings for the whole part, and Start End now is a bit different. It's actually going to give me two different settings, and that actually is at the start and the end. It makes sense. So let's go ahead and give you an example. If I do start and I change the time of day to somewhere in the morning, something like this, looks pretty good. Go back to my video and I can go to my end. Now this is going to be different. I'm going to actually go back to my location, change my time of day to more of a sunset shot, maybe something like this. That looks pretty good. And so at this point, I can go back to my clip and see what happens. So at the beginning, it's clearly in the morning. And I know it's kind of hard to tell, but it's not in the afternoon. But then we transition into the afternoon and then finally get more to a dusk look. And so let's go ahead and just scrub across this, and we can even see the sun move as I scrub. Of course, the quality isn't that great, but we could see the sun move. And as I transition along, the sun's higher in the sky, and then finally, as I get more towards the end, we can see that the sun is starting to go down, and I get that more of a dust shot. And of course, then I jump to the next part. Let's actually change this into a bit more of a night shot. Change the time of day a little more. That looks good right there. We're starting to get a little more into the night. Of course, I can change my background, anything like that. Of course, I probably do. Anything like that looks pretty good. So I can go back to my video, and really, we've kind of covered the full gamut here. We've created the different parts. Of course, you can change the time, anything like that. And, really, this is the type of thing that I would build if I wanted to make a really nice looking animation of a particular project or a piece of a project, and then maybe have a separate part with a really nice looking rendering that's just a still image at the end. Really nice, really simple. Again, I can change the length of it all. Very simple. What I am going to do is, at the end of this video, end up placing the full animation of this. I'm not going to do really much, if not anything else, to this animation, maybe besides clouds or like any really little things, just to show you what you can ultimately end up with, because I know the quality hasn't been that great as we're actually editing, which, to the point that we really need it, it doesn't matter. Like, we can see individual clips and what they look like, and the quality is there, but it's really the end result in video that we want to see. So I am going to put that at the end of this video. So that will do it, folks. We've covered really everything we need to with all the videos and animation, different parts and pieces and clips and whatnot, and all the different settings that you have and the way you can really organize it well. And I really applaud Twinmotion because it does a great job of allowing you to correctly organize not only your model elements, but all of your effects, and move those effects across different scenes really easily to make very nice looking videos. Some of the more professional images and videos are spectacular, but you can do all of it yourself. But if you stuck around this long, the last thing I want to cover is this is going to absolutely change everything as far as quality goes for your videos. And I don't know why this is not more prominent within the video settings, but it really is. It's so important. So if I come over here to my burger menu, which I love that they call it that, then my preferences, I've got all these preferences to look at, but what really matters is the export. And if I look at export, I could see update reflections and then smog haze quality. Now, update reflections, if you're using reflection probes, which I highly recommend that you do, if you're familiar with them and have used them, the way they work is that you're going to have to update the way that, what they're reflecting. If you've made any settings to them, you're going to need to update them. If you've made other effects, change the time of day, anything like that, you need to update them because they're static. They are not something that is changing all the time. They're not working in real time. Now, that's unfortunate, but Twinmotion does that so they do not have to sacrifice quality and so that the program continues to run. If you've worked with other programs such as Unity, the reflection probes are always updated and always bogging down your workflow, and it's just a mess. It can be if you have a lot of elements and a lot of reflection probes. So the idea here, and this applies so much because it's an animation, you have to update the reflections on export. And so the nice thing about this is that, like I said before, you have to update those reflection probes every single time you want to make a new image or change effects. And so the nice thing about this box is that when you export a video or even an image in that regard, because it's export, it's going to update those reflection probes for you. And of course, you can do it yourself for an image, which I've done in the past plenty of times, but you can't do that yourself for every single frame of a video because you just can't do it. You'd have to stitch the video yourself. It would be so pointless. We wouldn't have this tutorial. It'd be a waste of time too. So this is going to update the reflections on every single frame, and so that they're matching the effects that you've applied to that particular clip all the time. And that is imperative. Otherwise, they're just sitting there reflecting something static as the video goes through. And if I hadn't checked this box, I wouldn't have had a reflection probe update as the video went on. It just wouldn't make sense. And then, of course, I would always just up the quality of your smog and haze. It just makes sense. Why would you not do that? So that will finally do it for everything, videos and animation in Twinmotion. It's really cool, really exciting, really easy, I must say. If you're familiar with editing images, I have a previous video on that. I dive into all the settings that you might want to worry about for changing the effects and the look of an image to get a really great rendering. The same applies to videos. So I hope you enjoyed this. And if you happen to learn something, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out a lot. Also, please consider subscribing and ringing that bell. That helps me out so much. I can't thank you enough if you've lasted this long. Really means a lot. I sure hope you have a wonderful day. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.